Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Gaijin Gaiden. And this time I want to talk to you about a really cool thing that I did over the weekend. So on Sunday I hopped on the Shinkansen and went over to Fukuoka, which is a really great town. If you ever come to Japan, I totally recommend visiting it. It's basically like the coolest city in all of Kyushu. Anyway, so I went over to the Fukuoka Asian Art Museum, and they had a really interesting special exhibit going on. And I'm going to show you some of the stuff I got there and talk about it a little bit. And this exhibit was called Marvel Age of Heroes Exhibition, which I'm talking about Marvel while wearing a Flash t-shirt. That's kind of how it goes. But anyway, it was 1,500 yen to get in, basically like 15 bucks, a little bit less. And I got my ticket here. And like a lot of things here in Japan, especially exhibits like this, you're not allowed to take pictures at most of it. There was a little area out in the front where you could take pictures. Mostly it was some mock-ups of like 4 different types of Iron Man armor and this life-size recreation of the Hulk. And it was really cool. There were some like little kids there who were really just, checking it out, and their parents were taking pictures, and it was really cute. Anyway, so in the exhibit they had quite a lot of really cool stuff there. Oh wow, my hair looks really bad. Anyway, I'm just gonna roll with it. Um, there was like original art drawn by some really famous Marvel artists. Like, I mean, they had actual like art that was drawn by Jack Kirby himself. Gil Kane was another guy that they had. There was some original stuff from Alex Ross. A lot of stuff from like various guys from like the '60s who created a lot of these characters. There was even a copy of the original Marvel Comics #1 from like 1939 with the Human Torch and the dude shooting a gun at him. I mean, it didn't look like it was obviously a little bit beat up, but man, that's really where it all started. And then they had some other copies, in that what poly permabound thing. I forget what exactly they call it. Just some of the like really landmark comics there. I actually saw an issue of the #1 issue of Fantastic Four, if I remember right, which was wow, just amazing to stop and think like, wow, what an important thing that is. So they had the exhibit set out in a couple different ways, and actually I have a little flyer I picked up here. I can show you this. There's some of the little Iron Man armor they had. And yeah. There was also even like on one of the video screens like a special message that Stan Lee had created just for this exhibit, mostly just talking about like, well, this is why I think Marvel's characters are popular, and it's basically just make them that we really try to make them seem like real people, just real people who happen to have superpowers. And then he also briefly spoke about how the Marvel had done really well in Japan. He thought that Japanese fans really sort of got the Marvel way of doing things, and that Marvel had had a really great relationship with the fans in Japan as well as various Japanese artists over the years. Even if I remember correctly, I think he even name dropped like the Spider-Man manga from like the 1970s, which they had copies of there too. And yeah, if you've never heard of that, they've actually done several different stories where Spider-Man was a guy from Japan. The '70s manga is probably the most well known, and I've always found it exceptionally interesting that Rumiko Takahashi actually got her start as an assistant to the artist on that series. And if you don't know who she is, she's basically the lady that would go on to create stuff like Inuyasha and Ranma One Half, Yurusei Yatsura, quite a few other series, but really great manga artist. So they had a little bit of started things off with a little bit of the history of Marvel, just kind of giving a quick hit the highlights things. Was a little surprised that they considered Civil War from back in 2010 to be such a major highlight, but okay, fair enough. Then they had various exhibits just talking about all of the really different heroes. You had your cosmic heroes like the Guardians of the Galaxy, and then you had your more street level heroes like Spider-Man. Of course, they had a big thing all about the Avengers. A lot of stuff based on the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and what was really awesome is they had loads of costumes and props from the actual Marvel movies. I mean, the sign even said it was from Marvel Studios, so these are like like legit costumes from the movies. And I love the movies. I mean, okay, not all of them are absolutely fantastic, but they're all at least decent, I think. Um, and it was really interesting just to be able to just really stand there and just really drink in all the details. Plus, you're sitting there, you're standing there thinking, like, man, like Scarlett Johansson wore that, and like, okay, this is Chris Evans' costume, Benedict Cumberbatch, Tom Hiddleston, all the people. It's like, man, these are like clothes these people have actually worn, and interesting. Maybe it's just my perception, or maybe it's just the way it's designed, but the Captain America helmet um, actually kind of makes it look like Chris Evans has an unusually small head. That's probably just like a weird perception, or maybe they didn't quite use the right head on the mannequin, but that's something that did jump out to me. Also, if you really look closely at like Thor and Loki's costumes, especially Thor's, they look really, really plastic. And like Mjolnir, Thor's hammer, if you ever actually are able to look really closely at the prop they use, it actually doesn't look that great. Looks it looks pretty fake. I mean, granted, when you're watching the movie, like, well, of course that's a prop and it's not really heavy. It's probably exceptionally light, but there's a difference between you know it being something in the movie that you don't really focus on most of the time, and then having it sit there right in front of you, and you're able to really just like, wow, this does look a little bit like like a toy. Of course, I mean, there's other little details. Like if they had like Star Lord's jacket, and you can just sort of like look at all the little scrapes on his buckles and stuff. You can see like this sort of like tiny little like what even look like sort of like I don't know if I could exactly use the word stain, but if you really stop and take a close look at like Benedict Cumberbatch's Doctor Strange costume, I mean, it really does look like it's made from like old cloth that could probably use a wash. And Also, kind of going by this, uh, Scarlett Johansson is apparently a lot shorter than I would have imagined she was. But again, that's just a matter of perception. Um, I was a little disappointed that there was only like a really sort of very, very brief mention of stuff like the Netflix shows. And there was a little nod here and there to Agents of Shield, but okay, fair enough. Those are things, but they're never going to be as big as the movies. So okay, cool. There was loads of really nice information around in Japanese and in English, all with quite good English. I mean, I really only spotted one or two little mistakes, and in something like this, you can't expect 100% perfection. Um, but they talked a lot, of course, about the history of Marvel. They gave a lot of information about the various characters. They also took the time to sort of explain a lot of the details about how comic books work in the United States, because, of course, it's very different than the big, big things of manga that people here buy on like a weekly basis. Basically kind of more or less 22 pages once a month these days. Of course, in the past it was a little bit different. Um, One thing that did sort of weird me out a little bit is they talked about how like a lot of the time the cover is not done by the artist that does the interior. And while that does happen sometimes, most of the time the covers of the comics are done by the artists who do the interior. Again, and they also explained like variant covers. They even talked about like in the 90s how they were constantly doing these like gold covers and silver covers and hologram covers and all this other crazy stuff. I mean, they sort of glossed over the fact that a lot of those comics with the fancy covers completely and utterly sucked in terms of story and sometimes in terms of art. But, you know, they're trying to keep it positive, of course. There's also an area where they sort of specifically talked about Marvel's relationship with Japan. Um, Especially they focused on the various Japanese artists who have done work with Marvel. Of course, probably the person most of us are most familiar with be Takeshi Miyazawa, who did a nice job on Runaways and did Spider-Man Loves Mary Jane and is still doing a lot of other stuff. But like legitimately famous artists have done stuff for Marvel simply by being fans of the characters. Like Kia Asamiya was was actually the artist on X-Men for a while, and he's a guy who's got quite a decent reputation here in Japan. If I remember correctly, he was the creator of Silent Mobius, and I'm pretty sure he did Martian's successor Desco as well. And speaking of that, this kind of leads into the coolest section of the whole thing, which was at the end. They had an area full of goodies that you could buy, and oh my God, it was. I ended up going on the last day. I was actually planning to go the week before, but I got sick. So of course, it being the last day, it was jammed. I mean, you could barely walk in this area. Like everywhere, there were people. A lot of this stuff, unsurprising, was also overpriced. They also made it a point to kind of mark certain items that were Japan exclusives. But yeah, I mean, they had like all these really nice. They had T-shirts, they had bags, they had backpacks. Of course, they had like loads and loads of toys and figures, plates and cups. I really gave some serious consideration to buying some Captain America chopsticks with a chopstick holder case, but I just like, I'm not spending $12 on a pair of chopsticks in a case. I don't care if it has a cartoon of like a kitty style drawing of Captain America on it. I'm not doing that. But I did get a few things. One of my favorites was this little notebook, and this is one of the the cover to this is a variant cover for an issue of Miss Marvel that was drawn by a Japanese artist. And this was nice because it was only, let me see here, 380 yen, so basically $3. I also picked up this this magnet, again also 380 yen. Just something kind of cool to stick on my fridge eventually. And a lot of those things that they had from, like, they had the variant covers and stuff that were drawn by Japanese artists. They had those available as posters as well, and those were, I think, if I remember right, like 800 yen. But what I really liked were the uniquely kind of Japanese things that just incorporated Marvel characters. They had like this fan that had a whole bunch of the Marvel characters on it. Like it was like a Japanese style fan with all these Marvel characters on it, except it was like $40. I'm not paying that for a fan. But I did pick up a couple of these things, which I really love. So these are called tenugui, which basically translates as hand towel. I'll show you the back where you can sort of see the actual picture somewhat. And yeah, my camera's basically like not that fantastic, but it's, as you can see, it's like Spider-Man on top of a Japanese-style building. You can't really see it, but there's little cherry blossoms falling down, and they've got this really nice little picture of the moon. They're a little bit like wall scrolls, if you've ever seen them, except they're just sort of longer and thinner. And they're based on, I guess, like old-style Japanese towels, although you're really, like something like this, of course, you're probably going to use it as a decoration and not to wipe your hands. It's just the name just never changed. And the other one I got was this one here with Deadpool, with springing into action with Mount Fuji in the background. Again, can't really make out the details super well just because I'm using a cheap Logitech camera. And I really loved this one here. um, with Iron Man flying through that famous Japanese painting by Hokusai in the well of the Great Wave off Kanagawa, which I thought was, I mean, whoever came up with that was very, very clever. And there were a few others there that I saw, but I didn't get them just because I didn't particularly like them. They had like Spider-Man and Venom on an old-style Japanese bridge. And then there's one other one that was Spider-Man. I don't remember exactly what it looked like. It was this kind of dark green color that I didn't really care for. Anyway, so I'm totally hanging the Spider-Man one up here in my apartment. I just haven't gotten around to it yet, and I'm debating what I'm going to do with the Iron Man and Deadpool wall hangers, I suppose is the best term to use. Anyway, so yeah, this was really just so cool. This is one of those things that's like, I mean, these are one of those things that really just sort of make being in Japan so great. You know, these unique opportunities to see things that you just never would have gotten to see back home. Now, I guess maybe I don't know a whole lot about this Marvel Age of Heroes exhibit. I mean, if I was living back in America and I lived in like New York or Chicago or LA, maybe I could have gone and seen this, and I would have seen most of the stuff. I mean, of course, this is Japan, so of course they're going to focus on certain Japanese aspects of things just to play to the home audience here. And I certainly would never have been able to buy those wall hangers in America. But yeah, that you can find stuff like this here to do and go to things like this. That's one of the things that really, really makes it worthwhile living here. The just utterly unique experiences that you can never have anywhere else, for the most part. Anyway, guys, I think I'm probably beginning to repeat myself a little bit, so I'm going to call it here. As always, please comment, rate, and subscribe. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter at GaijinGaiden. Until next time, please take care and have a good one.